Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The city of Moscow glittered under a steel gray sky, its sharp towers of glass and concrete reflecting the cold light of dawn. The streets below were crowded as always, with citizens going about their business under the ever-watchful eye of the state. Massive billboards broadcast government-approved messages, each a reminder of the so-called democratic ideals that held the country together. Vote for the people, vote for the future, vote for stability. The same message, year after year, as if stability meant anything more than the continued rule of the Communist Party. Anton Volkov watched the scene from his small apartment window, sipping a cup of bitter black coffee. In another hour, he'd be at his desk writing another fluff piece for the state-run newspaper. He'd long given up any pretense of being a real journalist. His job was simple: report the government's version of events, no questions asked. Elections were coming up again, and this year's candidates were as uninspiring as the last. Each of them handpicked by the party, playing their role in the illusion of choice. Anton sighed, rubbing his temple. His head ached from lack of sleep and too much time spent thinking about things he had no power to change. He glanced at the clock. Time to get ready. As he prepared for another day of work, something caught his eye on the television. The usual dull propaganda had been interrupted by a different face. Anton turned up the volume. A man in his mid-40s, with graying hair and the kind of intensity that didn't come from a script, was speaking directly to the camera. "My name is Mikhail Orlov," the man said, and I am here to tell you the truth about this election. For too long, we've been living under the illusion of democracy. But the time has come to wake up. The people of this country deserve real freedom, not this farce of choice. I stand before you as an independent candidate, not approved by the party, not backed by their money or their influence. I stand for the people. I stand for you. Anton sat down, intrigued. Independent candidates were rare, almost unheard of, and they never made it this far without being quietly removed from the race. Orlov's message was dangerous. It had the potential to stir something in the hearts of the people, something Anton hadn't felt in a long time. The broadcast abruptly cut off, replaced by a government official urging calm and dismissing Orlov's words as the ramblings of a madman. Anton leaned back, chewing on his lip. Orlov wouldn't last long. The state would see to that. Later that day, the newsroom buzzed with activity. Anton's boss, a rotund man named Sergey with thinning hair and a permanent scowl, barked orders as usual. "We were running a piece on Orlov. The higher-ups want him discredited. Start digging into his background. Find any dirt you can. If you can, timed it, make it up." Anton nodded without protest. He'd done this 100 times before, fabricating scandals or exaggerating minor infractions to ruin someone's reputation. Yeah, it was standard practice for anyone who posed a threat to the regime. Still, something about Orlov's speech gnawed at him. The man didn't seem like a typical opposition puppet, the kind the state allowed to give the appearance of choice. He seemed genuine. After hours of combing through old records, Anton found nothing on Orlov that could be used against him. No shady business deals, no history of corruption, not even a whisper of scandal. It was as if the man had lived a clean life untouched by the grime of politics. Anything, Sergey came from behind him, making Anton jump. "Nothing yet," Anton replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. Sergey grunted. He said, "Not clean. No one is clean. Keep looking. And if you can, to find anything by tomorrow, we'll make sure he's sturdy enough." Anton watched Sergey walk away, his stomach twisting with disgust. He'd spent too many years lying for the regime, but this felt different. This wasn't some minor candidate who posed no real threat. Orlov had struck a nerve with the public, and that made him dangerous, not just to the government, but to Anton as well. That night, Anton couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Orlov's words echoing in his mind. "I stand for you." It was a simple message, but one that carried weight in a country where freedom was an illusion. Anton hadn't thought about real democracy in years. The last time he cared about politics, he'd been fresh out of university, full of ideals, and ready to change the world. But that had been a lifetime ago, before the reality of the regime crushed his spirit. Unable to shake the feeling that something was about to change, Anton got out of bed and sat at his desk. He opened his laptop and began typing. At first, the words came slowly, but as he wrote, they began to flow. He didn't know what he was doing or why, but he couldn't stop. The truth had been buried for too long, and for the first time in years, he felt compelled to dig it up. By dawn, Anton had written an article that laid bare the reality of the election. He detailed the regime's manipulation of votes, the bribery, the threats, the illusion of choice. It was raw, honest, and damning. But he couldn't publish it if he did. He'd be arrested within hours, his career destroyed, his life ruined. Anton closed the laptop, feeling the weight of his cowardice. He couldn't fight the system, not alone, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that Orlov might be the key to something bigger. The following day, Anton went to work as usual, but something had changed. The newsroom was buzzing with rumors of Orlov's death's growing popularity. Despite the smear campaign the government had launched, his support had only increased. People were talking about him in hushed tones, passing around his speeches on encrypted messaging apps, whispering about a future where real democracy might be possible. Sergei was furious. "This bastard is making us look weak, Tari," he spat, pacing the floor. "Dairy, we need to shut him down. Now, Anton watched from his desk. His heart pounding. Organized fries had become more than just a political movement. It was a threat to the regime's very existence. And if the government couldn't stop him with lies, they would resort to more extreme measures. That evening, Anton received a call from an unknown number. He hesitated before answering, his pulse quickening. "Anton Volkov," a female voice asked. "Yes," he replied cautiously. "My name is Alina Novikova. I used to work in the intelligence agency. We need to talk." They met in a small cafe on the outskirts of the city, far from the prying eyes of the government. Alina was in her 30s with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor. She got straight to the point. "Orlov is in danger," she said. "The government is planning to assassinate him. They've already made several attempts on his life, but he's managed to evade them so far. But it's only a matter of time." Anton's stomach churned. He had suspected the regime would escalate their tactics, but hearing it confirmed was still a shock. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're a journalist," Alina replied. "Sutter, you have a platform. You can expose what's happening before it's too late." Anton shook his head. "I can tell if I publish anything against the government, they'll come for me. I have a family too." Alina leaned forward, her eyes burning with intensity. "Tell, if you don't talk, I'll kill Orlov, and this country will remain under the regime, Central. You have a chance to make a difference. Anton, don't waste it." He felt trapped, torn between his fear and a growing sense of responsibility. Alina slid a folder across the table. Inside are documents that prove the government is manipulating the election. They've been rigging the vote for years, and they'll do it again this time, unless someone stops them. Anton stared at the folder, his mind racing. This was it, the evidence he needed to take down the regime, but it came with a price. Anton sat in the cafe long after Alina left, the weight of the folder pressing down on him like an anchor. The documents inside it were dangerous. He knew that without even opening them. This was not just some conspiracy theory spun up by disgruntled opposition. It was the raw truth, the kind that could topple government. Anton thought about his wife, Anya, and their young son, Leah. If he went through with this, if he published this information, his family would be in danger. But if he didn't, Mikhail Orlov would die, and with him, the last hope for real change in the country. When Anton finally left the cafe, it was dark, the streets eerily quiet. His mind buzzed with questions, fear, and a small flicker of hope that he hadn't felt in years. The folder felt heavier than ever as he slipped it under his jacket, his heart pounding as he made his way home. Once inside his cramped apartment, Anton locked the door and sat at the kitchen table. Anya was already asleep, their son tucked in beside her. He was alone with the truth now, and it terrified him. Slowly, he opened the folder and began to sift through the paper. There were copies of internal memos from high-ranking officials, detailing how they planned to rig the upcoming election. There were orders for bribes, threats, even instructions for ballot tampering. And then there was the most damning piece, a series of emails between General Pavel Sokolov and the head of the intelligence agency, discussing Tile, the Orlov problem, Tias, and planning his assassination. Anton's hands trembled as he read the final memo. "Try the target will be eliminated within the next 48 hours. Ensure media coverage is controlled to prevent any public backlash. The narrative must be maintained. They were going to kill Orlov and Sue. Anton's first instinct was to run to hide the folder and pretend he had never seen it. But that wasn't an option anymore. Orlov was more than just a candidate. Now he was a symbol. And symbols, and Anton knew, were powerful things. They could ignite revolution. He spent the rest of the night writing, fueled by adrenaline and a sense of impending doom. The words poured out of him in a torrent, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he crafted an article that exposed the regime, stark corruption in stark, undeniable detail. He quoted the documents, laid out the evidence, and wove it into a story that was both factual and damning. By dawn, it was finished. Anton stared at the screen, his heart racing. He knew what he had to do, but the weight of it was crushing. Once this was published, there would be no going back. He would become a target, just like Orlov. He thought about Alina's words. You have a chance to make a difference, Anton Don T. wasted. Taking a deep breath, Anton attached the article to an encrypted email and sent it to several underground media outlets. Within minutes, it would be out of his hands, beyond his control. The truth was free now, and there was no stopping it. He closed his laptop, his hands shaking. It was done. The next 24 hours passed in a blur. Anton went to work as usual, trying to keep his head down, but the tension in the air was palpable. The underground press had picked up his article, and it spread like wildfire. By midday, it was all anyone could talk about. The regime-style corruption had been exposed for the world to see, and people were furious. Protests erupted across the city. Thousands of people took to the streets demanding real democracy, calling for Orlov's protection. The government responded with force, deploying riot police and military units to control the crowds, but it was clear they were losing their grip. The truth had ignited something deep within the population, something that had been simmering for years. At the newsroom, Sargi was livid. This is a disaster. There he shouted, pacing back and forth. The higher-ups are demanding we discredit this nonsense immediately. Anton sat quietly at his desk, his heart pounding. He knew it was only a matter of time before they traced the article back to him. He'd covered his tracks as best he could, but the state of intelligence apparatus was vast and unforgiving. It wouldn't take long for them to connect the dots. That evening, as Anton made his way home, he noticed a black car idling at the end of his street. His blood ran cold. He'd seen that car before, parked outside the homes of other dissidents just before they disappeared. Without thinking, Anton turned and walked in the opposite direction. Ducking into an alley, he pulled out his phone and dialed Alina's number. They were watching me, he said as soon as she picked up. Hello, get out of the city. DL, she replied, her voice urgent. Anton didn't try to go home that night. Instead, he met Alina at a safe house on the outskirts of the city where several other activists had gathered. Orlov was there too, looking haggard but determined. He had heard about the article, and it had given him a surge of support like nothing he'd expected. You did this, Orlov asked, shaking Anton's hand. Here you exposed them. Anton nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and fear. Hey, Cher, it's not over yet. They'll come after all of us. They already are, Orlov said grimly. It's the people are with us now. We have a chance, maybe the only chance we'll ever get to change things. Outside, the sound of distant gunfire echoed through the night. The protests were growing more violent, the regime becoming more desperate to cling to power. The next day, the government declared martial law. Tanks rolled through the streets of Moscow, and the media was flooded with messages of stability and order, urging citizens to remain calm. But the people weren't listening anymore. Orlov's movement had become a full-blown revolution, and the regime's efforts to suppress it only fueled the fire. Anton, now a fugitive, stayed hidden in the safe house with Alina and the other activists. They spent their days coordinating with underground networks, organizing protests, and smuggling information to the outside world. Every night, they listened to reports of growing unrest of citizens rising up in cities across the country. But the regime was ruthless. Sokolov's forces cracked down harder than ever, arresting, torturing, and killing anyone suspected of supporting the rebellion. The streets ran red with the blood of those who dared to stand up for freedom. Anton knew it was only a matter of time before the safe house was discovered. The government's reach was too long, its grip too tight, and yet, despite the danger, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. For the first time in years, people were fighting back. They were demanding real democracy, and they weren't from backing down. On the third day of martial law, Anton received word that Orlov had been captured. He had been taken in a raid on a protest in Red Square, along with dozens of his supporters. The government was preparing to execute him publicly as a warning to anyone else who dared defy the regime. Anton's heart sank. Without Orlov, the movement would falter. He was the symbol of their resistance, the figurehead that people rallied around. If the regime killed him, they would crush the hope that had sparked this revolution. "We have to save him," Elena said, her voice steady but urgent. "Oracle, if they kill Orlov, it's over." Anton nodded, his mind racing. He didn't know how they could pull off something so impossible, but he knew they had to try. That night, under the cover of darkness, Anton and a small group of activists made their way into the heart of Moscow. The city was under lockdown with military checkpoints on every corner, but they had allies on the inside, people willing to risk everything for the cause. As they approached the government building where Orlov was being held, Anton felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the final gamble. If they succeeded, they could save Orlov and keep the revolution alive. If they failed, they would all die. They moved quickly, silently, slipping past guards and into the basement where Orlov was being kept. Anton's heart raced as they crept through the dimly lit corridors, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. When they finally reached Orlov's cell, Anton couldn't help but feel a surge of relief. Orlov was alive, though barely. His face was bruised, his body battered, but his eyes still burned with determination. "We're getting you out of here." Orlov smiled weakly. "You read a fool for coming after me." "Maybe like me," Anton replied, "but fools are the only ones who ever change the world." They freed Orlov, but their escape wasn't quiet. Alarms blared as they raced through the building, and within minutes, they were being pursued by armed guards. Bullets whizzed past them as they ran, and Anton's heart pounded in his chest. They were so close to freedom. But just as they reached the exit, a gunshot rang out. Anton felt a searing pain in his side and stumbled, collapsing to the ground. He gasped for breath, the world spinning around him as blood soaked through his shirt. "Go," he shouted, his vision blurring. "Will he get him out of here?" Elena hesitated, her eyes wide with fear, but Orlov grabbed her arm. "Hey, we have to move." Anton watched as they disappeared into the night, the sound of gunfire fading in the distance. He lay there gasping for breath, knowing that he had done everything he could. The revolution would go on with or without him. And as the darkness closed in, Anton couldn't help but smile. The truth was free.